They have expectations. This is the part that rarely gets named directly, that the avoidant who initiates no contact is not simply withdrawing into neutral silence, is not retreating into an empty space where nothing is anticipated, is carrying beneath the managed exterior of the distance a specific set of expectations about what the silence will produce. Understanding what those expectations are, honestly, without either flattering them into victimhood or dismissing them into indifference, changes how the silence is navigated, changes what it means, changes what both people are actually doing when the contact stops. The first expectation, that you will reach first. The avoidant who goes no contact expects, at some level, that the silence will be broken from your end, not as a conscious plan, as the background assumption of someone whose experience of intimate relationships has consistently confirmed a particular pattern. When they withdraw, the other person eventually reaches. When they go quiet, the person who loves them eventually speaks. When the distance is created, the pull of the bond eventually produces contact from the other side. This expectation was formed through experience, was accurate in previous relationships, has been reinforced enough times that it operates as the default prediction, not held consciously as a belief but running as the system's model of how this goes. The expectation functions as a cushion, makes the no contact more comfortable than it would otherwise be. If the reaching is coming, the silence is temporary. If the bond will pull you toward contact eventually, the distance is not a genuine ending but a preferred configuration. The avoidant at managed distance, you oriented toward them, the dynamic stable in its familiar shape. The cushion is real, and the expectation that produces it is real. Which is why the experience of the reaching not coming, of the silence being met with silence, produces the specific destabilization that your no contact, when genuine, always produces. The second expectation, that your feelings will stay consistent. The avoidant who goes no contact expects your love to remain intact and accessible, not because they are arrogant. Because the love, from their experience of it, has been remarkably consistent, has persisted through withdrawals, has outlasted distances, has been present through the push and pull of the dynamic with a constancy that was genuine and that the avoidant on some level has come to rely on. The love was the stable element. The avoidance availability fluctuated, closer, then distant, then closer again, but your love in the background remained, was always there, was the thing that made the return possible when the distance had run its course and the gray had accumulated enough to produce the reaching. The expectation is that this will continue, that the love is a constant. That however long the no contact lasts, the love will be there when it ends, that you will be available to be returned to in the form you were always available in. This expectation is also a cushion, removes the urgency from the no contact. If the love is constant, if you will be there, then the timing of any return is entirely in the avoidant's control. They can take whatever space is needed. The love will wait. What genuinely disrupts this expectation is not the withdrawal of love, which may not happen and does not need to happen for the dynamic to change. What disrupts it is the change in your availability, the genuine redirection of your life toward what is actually present, the honest shift from oriented toward the avoidant to genuinely occupied with your own life. The love may still be present, but its availability, its readiness to be the thing that is returned to, is no longer guaranteed in the same way. That change in availability is what the avoidance system registers and does not have an adequate response to. The third expectation, that the silence will restore the preferred configuration. The avoidant goes no contact in part because contact had become too costly, too activating, too close to the threshold where the alarm fires consistently and the management protocol runs at high capacity and the self-contained life feels genuinely difficult to maintain. The no contact is supposed to restore the preferred configuration, the walls back up, the interior private, the alarm quiet, the self-sufficiency sufficient, and the silence does restore some of this. The immediate pressure of intimacy lifts, the alarm reduces, some version of the preferred configuration returns, but the expectation is that this restoration will be complete. Will feel like the genuine return to equilibrium that previous distances provided, will produce the specific, familiar, this is better quality of someone who has successfully restored their preferred relational state. The restoration is incomplete, because what the avoidant did not fully account for is how thoroughly your presence had become part of the texture of daily life. Not as dependence, the avoidant would resist that word and it would not be accurate, as the specific ambient background quality of having someone particular in the relational landscape. Someone whose presence produced a register of experience that the self-contained life does not provide and cannot generate internally. The preferred configuration restored has something missing in it that the preferred configuration before you did not have, because before you, the avoidant did not know what was missing. Now they do, and the restoration that the no contact was supposed to provide is incomplete in precisely the place where the knowing lives. The fourth expectation, that they will feel better. The avoidant expects to feel better in the silence, not immediately. The avoidant is realistic enough to expect an adjustment period, the acute discomfort of the transition, the specific, temporary difficulty of reorganizing around a new configuration. But after the adjustment, they expect the silence to produce what distance has always produced: relief, the genuine, settled, this is right quality of someone who has returned to what they need, the specific ease of an interior that is not under the constant, low-level pressure of genuine intimacy. The freedom that the self-sufficient life provides when it is not being strained by the demands of genuine closeness. The feeling better is slow to arrive, slower than previous distances produced, because the gray arrives alongside the relief and does not diminish on the expected timeline. Because the flatness that settles over ordinary activities has a specific located quality that previous flatness did not have. Because the self-sufficiency that was restored by previous distances feels, this time, quieter than it used to feel. The avoidant expected to feel better, feels different instead, not worse in every dimension. The acute discomfort of the activated alarm has reduced. But not the settled, this is right quality that was anticipated, something else, something that does not fit neatly into either better or worse. The specific, ambient, difficult-to-name quality of someone who has restored a configuration that no longer feels entirely sufficient. The fifth expectation, that the pattern will hold. Underneath all the other expectations is a foundational one. That this will go the way it always goes. Distance is created, the other person eventually reaches, relief is found in the silence. The preferred configuration is restored, life reorganizes around the new shape. Eventually, when the gray accumulates enough, the return becomes possible. The reaching happens from their end, the dynamic resumes, the pattern holds, it is always held. The avoidant who goes no contact is not consciously thinking through this sequence, but the system's model of how intimate relationships work, the model that was built through repeated experience, contains this pattern as the default trajectory. The expectation that this will hold is the deepest cushion of all. And it is the expectation that your genuine silence, the specific, real, built through actual investment quality of someone who has genuinely redirected, disrupts most fundamentally, because you are not following the pattern, not as a strategy. Because the pattern required your consistent orientation toward the avoidant as one of its necessary elements, and that orientation has genuinely shifted. The pattern cannot run without the element it was always relying on, and the avoidance system, encountering a pattern that is not running as modeled, does something it rarely does. It updates, slowly, incompletely. With significant resistance from the management protocol that was built around the old model, but the updating is real, and what it produces, however slowly, however incompletely, is the honest recognition that the model was wrong, that the pattern does not hold indefinitely. That the love and the availability and the consistent orientation that the pattern depended on are not permanent features of a landscape that can be reliably returned to. That recognition is what your genuine silence ultimately produces in the avoidant, not immediately, not dramatically, but genuinely. And what the avoidant does with that recognition, whether it produces the honest reckoning that changes the pattern or gets managed back into a more comfortable narrative, is the only remaining question, the one that is entirely theirs to answer. Through behavior, over time, in the ordinary moments, your silence has done what it can do, the rest is theirs. And your life, the actual, genuine, built through real investment life that produced the quality of silence that disrupted their expectations, is yours, completely, to inhabit, now. When the first expectation fails, the reaching does not come. The avoidant goes no contact, the adjustment period passes. The acute phase of the transition settles into the more ambient quality of the established distance, and the reaching does not come. In the first days this is unremarkable. The reaching not coming immediately is consistent with the model. The love is deep and the person is genuine and they are processing. The reaching will come when the processing has run its course. In the first weeks, the absence of the reaching becomes slightly more present as a fact. The monitoring that was passive becomes slightly more active. The peripheral checking increases. The question of whether the silence is a longer than usual phase or something categorically different begins quietly to be entertained. By the first month, the question is more insistent. The model is being tested. The expectation that was comfortable in the early days is now requiring active maintenance. The avoidant catches themselves, not always consciously, looking for evidence that the reaching is imminent. that something in the periphery suggests orientation toward them, that the silence is the kind that precedes contact rather than the kind that is simply silence. The evidence does not come. What comes instead is the accumulating awareness that the evidence is not coming, that the checking is returning nothing that suggests the reaching is building, that the quality of the absence is consistent in a way that previous absences were not consistent, has not the charged quality of someone who is managing a strong impulse not to reach, but the quieter quality of someone who is genuinely elsewhere. This accumulating awareness does something specific to the avoidance interior. It begins to shift the question from when will they reach to why are they not reaching. And the honest answer to that question, the one that the management protocol works hard to prevent from being fully formed, is the beginning of the genuine reckoning. They are not reaching because they have genuinely redirected. And the genuine redirection is the most honest communication you have ever sent about where you actually are. When the second expectation fails, the love becomes unavailable. The love itself does not disappear. This needs to be said accurately. The empath's love for the avoidant does not evaporate through the genuine silence, is not switched off by the decision to redirect toward their own life. What changes is its availability. Before the genuine silence, the love was available in a specific way, present at the surface, accessible, ready to be received and responded to at any moment the avoidant chose to reach. The love and the availability were tightly coupled. Wherever the love was, the availability was. The genuine silence decouples them. The love is still present, but it is no longer primarily organized around the avoidant's potential return, is no longer the thing that keeps you oriented toward their movements, is no longer the active, available, ready to be resumed quality of someone who is waiting. The love has become something the empath carries rather than something they offer. Carried, real, genuine, not requiring management, but not deployed, not organized around anything, simply present in the interior alongside all the other genuine things that the genuine life contains. The avoidant, whose system was calibrated to the availability rather than simply to the love, registers this change, cannot precisely locate what has changed. The love did not announce its change in status. The empath did not say, I still love you but am no longer organized around you. The shift was silent, as genuine interior shifts always are, but the system feels the difference. The specific, previously reliable quality of your availability, the sense of you as someone who was fundamentally accessible, fundamentally oriented, fundamentally there if returned to, is not present in the same form. Something has moved, not the love's organization around them. And the avoidant, encountering the absence of the availability they were relying on, discovers something the second expectation was protecting them from discovering, that what they were relying on was not guaranteed, was not permanent, was not an inexhaustible feature of the relational landscape that could be returned to at any point on their timeline, was a person. An actual, finite, genuinely elsewhere person who has redirected the organization of their love toward their own life rather than toward the question of when the avoidant will return. That discovery is significant, is among the most destabilizing things the avoidance system encounters. Because the model of intimate relationships that the system was running included your availability as a constant, as the reliable element in an otherwise variable dynamic, and constants that turn out to be variables require significant model updating. When the third expectation fails, the preferred configuration does not feel preferred. The walls are back up, the interior is private. The alarm has quieted. By every measure the avoidance system uses to assess its own state, the preferred configuration should be present. It is present, and it does not feel the way it used to feel. The preferred configuration before you felt like freedom, like the specific, unencumbered, self-directed ease of someone who had chosen their own company and found it genuinely sufficient. The solitude was inhabited, the independence was real. The self-sufficient life had genuine texture, interests, work, the specific pleasures of an existence that was fully one's own. The preferred configuration after you feels like the preferred configuration minus something, not minus you in the obvious, sentimental sense. Minus the specific register of experience that was available in the relational landscape that included you, the specific quality of being genuinely known, the ambient warmth of having someone particular whose presence produced something that the self-sufficient interior cannot generate. This minus is not dramatic, does not prevent functioning, does not announce itself loudly. It is present as a quality, a specific, persistent, slightly lower than before temperature in the interior, the specific, quiet cost of having expanded through genuine connection and then contracted back to the pre-expansion dimensions. The contraction is what was expected, was anticipated as the natural return to the preferred state. What was not anticipated is that the contraction would feel like reduction rather than restoration. The avoidant expected to return to the preferred configuration and find it as sufficient as it was before, finds it sufficient, and finds it smaller than it used to be, because the preferred configuration was built before the expansion. Was sufficient for an interior that had not yet experienced what genuine connection with you produced, was the right size for who they were before the bond formed and the walls came down, and something was genuinely shared that had not been genuinely shared before. That interior is not the same size anymore, has been expanded by what you brought to it. And the preferred configuration, fitted for the pre-expansion interior, no longer fits quite right. That misfit is what the third expectation's failure consists of. When the fourth expectation fails, the better does not come. The adjustment period passes, the acute phase settles, the weeks become a month and the month extends. The better does not arrive, what arrives instead is the gray. The specific, persistent, located flatness that has been described throughout this body of work, the quality of a life that is functioning and forward-appearing and missing the specific register of experience that your presence activated. The avoidant applies the usual remedies, productivity, the full schedule, the busyness that stays ahead of the feeling. Social contact that provides warmth without intimacy, new interests, forward momentum. The remedies work in the limited sense that the gray does not overwhelm, does not prevent functioning, does not produce the visible collapse that would require acknowledgement, but the remedies do not produce the better that was expected. The better that was expected was the settled, this is right quality of someone who has returned to what they need, the specific ease of the restored self-sufficiency that previous distances always eventually provided. What is present instead is something that does not have a clean name, not grief, not longing in the obvious sense, not the acute discomfort of active loss, something more ambient. More persistent, more specific in what it is pointing at, the specific, irreplaceable quality of what was there that is not there anymore. This specificity is what makes the fourth expectation's failure so consequential, because previous gray, the adjustment period flatness of previous distances, was general, was the ordinary difficulty of reorganizing around a new relational configuration. Could be addressed by the ordinary remedies of forward motion and social contact and the resumption of the self-sufficient life's genuine pleasures. This gray is specific, knows what it is pointing at, is not the general difficulty of loss but the particular located absence of something particular, and the particular cannot be addressed by the general. Cannot be resolved by the ordinary remedies because the ordinary remedies provide general warmth and general connection and general resumption of life's available pleasures, none of which are you, specifically. The fourth expectation fails because better without you is not the better that was anticipated, is a different configuration of sufficient. Not the one that included the specific register of experience that your presence produced. And the difference between sufficient without you and the life that included you is what the gray is accurately measuring. When the fifth expectation fails, the pattern does not hold. This is the deepest failure, the most foundational. The one that requires the most significant updating of the avoidance model of how intimate relationships work. The pattern was supposed to hold. The pattern has always held. Distance is created. The other person eventually reaches. Relief is found. The preferred configuration is restored. The gray accumulates when it accumulates. The reaching happens from the avoidance end. The dynamic resumes. The pattern holds. Every element of the pattern is failing. The reaching did not come from your end. The love's availability changed. The preferred configuration does not feel preferred in the old way. The better did not arrive. And the gray, which was supposed to eventually produce the avoidance reaching back, the return to the dynamic, the resumption of the pattern, is not producing the usual outcome. Because what the reaching back was supposed to return to is not what it was. You are not in the same position. The genuine silence has produced genuine change in you. The investment in your own life is real. The redirection of primary attention is not performed. The somewhere you have arrived at is genuinely yours. The return, if it came, would not find the same configuration. And some part of the avoidance system, the part that has been monitoring the situation with unusual attention, that has been checking with more frequency than previous distances required, that has found the peripheral landscape consistently failing to provide the evidence of your continued orientation, knows this. Knows the pattern is not holding. And with the pattern's failure comes something the avoidance system has never previously had to process in the context of this dynamic. The genuine possibility that this is actually done. Not a phase, not a longer than usual silence that will eventually produce the reaching, not the dynamic in one of its more extended periods of low contact, actually done, the bond real. The love genuine on both sides, the connection significant, and also actually done in the practical, behavioral, showed in the quality of your silence sense. Two things simultaneously true, the bond real and the availability genuinely changed. That simultaneity, that two things can both be true, that the love can be genuine and the pattern can still genuinely fail, is the most significant update the avoidance model has ever been required to make. What the failed expectations produce together. The five failures do not arrive separately and sequentially. Arrive together in the overlapping, mutually reinforcing way that related recognitions always arrive. The reaching not coming, the love's availability changed, the preferred configuration insufficient, the better not arriving, the pattern not holding. Together they constitute a single, comprehensive, cannot be managed away indefinitely recognition. That what the avoidant had was more than the pattern required them to acknowledge, and that the pattern, by requiring them not to acknowledge it, produced its loss. This recognition is the most honest thing the avoidant has encountered in the context of this relationship. Is more honest than anything produced in the active dynamic, when the alarm was running and the cost assessment was ongoing, and the management protocol was intercepting the full appreciation before it could land. It is honest because it is produced by evidence rather than by feeling, by the accumulation of prediction failures rather than by the emotional urgency of the bond. By the specific, concrete, cannot be rationalized past reality of each expectation failing in sequence. The recognition, arrived at through the evidence of failed expectations, has a specific quality. It is quiet, is not dramatic, does not arrive with the emotional force of revelation. Arrives with the specific, settled, nowhere left to hide quality of something that has been true for a long time and is now simply undeniable. What is undeniable is the value of what was there. What was there was not ordinary, was not the adequate connection the pattern implied it was. Was specific, particular, irreplaceable, the kind of thing that the pattern's continued running was not adequately accounting for. And the pattern's running, inadequately accounting for what was actually there, produced the loss of it. That is the recognition. And what the avoidant does with it, whether it produces the genuine, therapeutic, pattern-interrupting work of becoming capable of what they feel, or whether it gets managed into a more comfortable narrative that allows the pattern to resume in its next iteration, is the only remaining question. The one that is entirely theirs, determined by their choices, showed in their behavior over time. In the ordinary moments, your silence created the conditions for that recognition. Your life, genuinely inhabited, genuinely yours, genuinely elsewhere, is what allowed the conditions to hold long enough for the recognition to become undeniable. That is what your silence produced in them. And what it produced in you, the genuine, building, actually yours life that the silence was always clearing space for, is worth more than any recognition in their interior, is worth more than any response their recognition might or might not eventually produce, is simply, honestly, completely yours, the most important thing that has happened in this entire dynamic, not their recognition. Your life actually lived, now. The avoidant in the gap looks from the outside like someone who has moved on. This is one of the more disorienting features of this specific period. The functioning is intact. The life appears to be continuing with the same basic competence the avoidant always brings to it. The productivity is present. The social navigation is present. The outward markers of someone who processed something and kept going are all present. What is not visible is the interior quality of the functioning. The specific, effortful quality of someone who is managing something significant below the surface of a life that looks uncomplicated from any external vantage point. The friends do not know. The colleagues do not know. The people who encounter the avoidant in the ordinary contexts of daily life have no access to the gap between what the avoidant's exterior presence and what the interior is currently living through. This invisibility is not new for the avoidant, has always characterized their experience of emotional difficulty. The interior has always been managed below the surface of the exterior. What is new is the quality of what is being managed. Previous management involved the compression of emotional content that the avoidant could at least partially dismiss, the adjustment period flatness, the ordinary residue of a distance that was running according to plan. That compression, while costly, was manageable within the existing framework. The framework held even while the feelings were being compressed. The current management involves the compression of something the framework cannot adequately hold, the recognition, the honest knowing, the specific, undeniable, model-updating awareness of what the pattern cost. That recognition is not compressible in the same way, is too honest, too specific. Too located in the particular rather than the general. The compression that handles ordinary emotional difficulty does not handle honest self-knowledge with the same efficiency. And so the exterior functioning continues, intact, competent, unremarkable from outside, while the interior is doing something it has never quite done before, sitting with what it knows. The specific daily experience of the gap. In the mornings, the gap is most present before the day's occupation has engaged. In the brief, unscheduled space between waking and the beginning of the routine, the knowing is simply there, has not been managed yet, has not been covered by the day's momentum. The avoidant does not allow this space to last. The routine engages quickly. The momentum of the structured day arrives with reliable efficiency. The knowing gets covered by the occupation of the hours, but it was there, in the morning, before the covering, and it is there again at the day's end. In the evenings, when the occupation has wound down and the interior has less competition from the forward motion of the managed life, the evenings are the gap's most honest hours. The avoidant who is living in the gap experiences the evenings differently than they did before the recognition arrived. The evenings used to have a certain quality, the specific, settled quality of someone whose preferred configuration was intact, whose interior was sufficiently managed, whose solitude was chosen rather than experienced as the residue of something that did not need to end. The current evenings have a different quality. The solitude is still present, the preferred configuration is technically restored, and something about the evening hours will not cooperate with the narrative that the configuration is actually preferred in the old sense. Something about the evening hours keeps returning to what the configuration is missing, not dramatically. With the specific, ambient, low-level persistence of something that has been stored whole rather than processed. The knowing that this is not the settled, this is right quality of the preferred configuration restored. Is the preferred configuration restored minus the register of experience that made the preferred configuration feel like a genuine choice rather than a defended position. In the midday hours, the gap is most successfully covered. The occupation is at its height. The forward motion is most consistently maintained. The avoidant in the middle of a workday is functionally the most intact, the most efficiently functioning, the most outwardly unremarkable, and even there in the most successfully occupied hours, the gap occasionally surfaces. In the specific, involuntary quality of a thought arriving uninvited, in the moment when something genuinely interesting happens and the first impulse is to share it with someone who is not there. In the brief, unprompted, impossible to schedule surfacing of you, not as grief, not as longing in the obvious sense, but as the simple, factual, persistent presence of someone who became genuinely woven into the texture of daily life, and whose absence is felt even in the midday hours when the occupation is most complete. What the avoidance relationships look like during this period. The people in the avoidance life during the gap period are receiving a version of the avoidant that is subtly but genuinely different from what they received before. The warmth is present, the competence is present. The specific, reliable quality of the avoidant as a friend, a colleague, a family member, all of that is present and is not being performed, but something underneath is more effortful than it used to be. The avoidant who is carrying the weight of the gap, the honest recognition that has not yet been converted into genuine work, sitting below the surface of a functioning life, is expending more interior resources on the management than previous periods required, which means the resources available for genuine presence in other relationships are slightly reduced. Not noticeably, necessarily. The avoidance baseline is high enough that slightly reduced still looks from the outside like full presence, but the people who know the avoidant well, who have access to the specific, particular quality of their genuine engagement over time, sometimes notice, cannot always name what they notice, something slightly different in the quality of attention. Something slightly more effortful in the ease, something that suggests the avoidant is managing something that the ordinary conversation is not addressing. These people generally do not ask directly, know better than to ask directly. Have learned through their own history with the avoidance interior that direct inquiry into what is being managed produces the management being managed more efficiently rather than the management being opened. And so the gap continues, unaddressed in the avoidance relational life, present, visible to the perceptive, unspoken. The moment the gap begins to close. The gap closes when it closes not through a single decision, but through the accumulation of evidence that living in the gap is more costly than the alternative being genuine engagement with the pattern, therapeutic support, the specific, sustained, not linear work of addressing what the alarm is actually responding to. Most avoidants resist the alternative for longer than the gap's obvious cost would seem to warrant. The resistance is not irrational. Engaging with the pattern genuinely means going into the interior in the presence of another person, which is precisely what the alarm fires against. The therapeutic relationship is itself an intimate relationship. Requires the specific vulnerability of being seen in the interior by someone whose perception matters, produces the alarm in its own way. The difference is the therapeutic relationship-specific structure, the boundedness of it, the professional quality of the holding. The specific, reliable, session-by-session consistency that provides something the avoidant's early relational environment did not provide genuine presence that is not contingent on the avoidant being a particular way. That difference is what makes the therapeutic relationship the one context in which the alarm can be felt and worked with rather than simply managed. And the moment the gap's cost exceeds the resistance to entering that context, the moment living with the unaddressed recognition becomes more exhausting than the prospect of addressing it, is the moment the gap begins to close, not dramatically, through the simple, quietly significant act of making the first appointment, of showing up. Of beginning the slow, imperfect, genuine process of turning toward what has always been there in the interior and discovering that the turning, however uncomfortable, is survivable. That moment is the avoidance to find, in their own time, through their own accumulation of evidence, on a timeline that belongs entirely to them. Your silence created the conditions that make the moment possible. Your life, the genuine, built through real investment, actually inhabited life that the silence both produced and expressed, is what you're doing while the moment is or is not arriving for them. Both things real, both things happening, only one of them yours.